Um, the themes this month, can we turn on one of the lights in the back or something?
I've been trying to experiment with that.
Just a light. When those people are snoring, I want to be able to identify who it is. The theme is the metaphysical trinity, creation, and manifestation, creativity and manifestation. I used to not speak on the theme at all. I would just speak on whatever Spirit provided for me to talk to. But now I always follow the theme. So my talk this time will cover that theme. It'll cover all of the themes for the rest of the year, just to make sure that I've covered everything. Because I'm speaking of heresy today, and I thought that was appropriate because you are all heretics.
And proud of it.
And proud of it. I want you to know that. You see, I think this is probably true, if not for all of you, for most of you. As we grew up in our society, there was this story told to us, a sort of picture painted that Jesus had his ministry for about 3 years before being killed, but that his disciples knew exactly what it was that he was teaching, and then they taught that to everybody else, and the church formed, and it taught exactly what Jesus was teaching for thousands of years. Somebody eventually sat down and wrote the New Testament to explain it all, and so that's what we have now. And that's a nice, clean, clear, comfortable story, just not even remotely true. So, of course, what we really know is, I mean, you might think there's different types of Christian churches now, but in the first 300 to 400 years, think of that time span, 300 to 400 years, people calling themselves Christians believed radically different things. Jesus was God. He wasn't God. He was eternally God, or he became God after the resurrection. That there's only one God. That there's two gods. One fairly incompetent God created the earth and the physical world, and then the wonderful God of Jesus has the Spirit. Because if you did that, you were a chooser. In Greek, a heretic. And so by being here, you are obviously heretics. So if this is what we have in Christianity, how can we know what Jesus was really trying to teach us? I mean, is there any way that we can know that? And, you know, you think about that situation. Here was this highly, highly evolved, holy man with these brilliant new spiritual thoughts trying to teach those around him. And yet he lived 2,000 years ago in this little backwater sort of place where over 90% of the people were illiterate. The groups he was with were fishermen and farmers and peasants and very basic people, most of whom hadn't left the area they grew up in ever. They probably hadn't gone 10 miles from where they grew up. They didn't have sophisticated spiritual training. And he had one other problem. He lived in a very violent era and a very violent place, where if you said the wrong things about religion, you could be killed. Obviously, he was killed. But not only that, from the Romans, if you said the wrong thing spiritually, if you said the wrong thing about religion, much as it is in some Islamic countries at this point, you could be stoned to death. In fact, in the New Testament, there's several times where Jesus leaves the area because people are threatening to stone him to death. Now, I might get up here and talk and not feel that you're going to totally accept what I say, but I'm not really afraid that you're going to stone me to death. I'm not saying you won't, it's just not one of my main fears. But you can imagine how difficult it is to go out and try to teach this radical spiritual idea under these circumstances. How frustrated Jesus must have been. And in fact, in the Gospel of Mark, he's talking to his disciples and he's saying, when he talks to the public, he says, I only teach in parables so that they may see but not perceive, and they may hear but not understand. Now that seems like a strange way to teach spiritual thoughts, so that you're purposely saying things so that people won't understand them. Now, some people say my talks are like that as well. But you can understand, he had these radical ideas, afraid that if he just got up and said them straight out, he would be attacked, and yet he was desperate to share them. And so he was putting them out in a form where only somebody who was spiritually advanced was going to get the real message. Well, how about his disciples? I mean, that was the concept, right? He has these 12 disciples who were supposed to be learning directly from him. And yet, also in the Gospel of Mark, this is to me amazing, 9 different places it says, and his disciples didn't understand what he was teaching. Most of those quotes are quotes directly from Jesus when he's trying to explain to them. And he says, and yet you do not understand what I am teaching you. So we have this man who, many believes, if not the most, certainly one of the most spiritually advanced people ever. Do we have no hope of being able to understand what it was he was trying to share with us? I think there is at least a way we can search for it. Because even though they didn't understand it, there is significant evidence that they did quote Jesus sometimes. Now, not everything that's quoted is obviously truly from him, but there's significant evidence that probably some of that is. And even though they didn't understand the meaning of it, if they gave us his words, perhaps we can figure out the meaning. And I want to talk about just a couple of examples of that right now. I'm going to talk about the Gospel of Thomas. I'm sure some of you have heard of that. I've spoken of it before. It's not in the Bible. It was actually one of the later Gospels written, and yet there's significant evidence that, because basically all it is quotes from Jesus. There's no story. There's no he was born here, he did this. Just quotes from Jesus. There's significant evidence that a lot of those are probably very early quotes and very probably things he said. So I want to talk about a couple of those to see if we can pull out the meaning to us and how it can give us direction. But I'm going to start with a little apology for Jesus. You know, when you're young and you're growing up, you tend to have your own areas you concentrate on. I don't know this for a fact. I've heard rumors that maybe he concentrated more on his theology homework than his physics homework. That may well be true, because what he talks about a lot is the divine light. Now, light is a form of energy, but light itself, light we see, is only one limited form of energy. There's a lot more. So I'm going to cut Jesus a little slack here and say what he was referring to was divine energy, even though he used the term that meant light. So I want to give you a quote that when his disciples ask him, you know, when people say where do you come from, what do we tell them? He says, tell them that you are children of the light, that you come from where the light came into being of itself. Now that's a little bit different. I mean, if you think of Christian teaching, if you think of most religious teaching, you come from the place where light came into being of itself. What are we to make of that? Well, if you study cosmology, the study of the universe, and particularly the study of the origin of the universe, almost all of us are familiar with the Big Bang Theory. Not the television show, the actual theory. What does it say? It tells us that this universe was created in an explosion of energy. Only energy. At that point, one type of energy. And that energy split off and became other types of energy. That energy created electrons, protons, neutrons, that created atoms, that came together, burst into fire as suns, that created other more complicated molecules that exploded, created planets, one of those planets being Earth, that humans developed on, and therefore it is the best scientific theory we have about the universe that says that we came from where the energy, we are the children, we are the descendants of that energy, from where the energy came into being of itself. Wow. Over 2,000 years ago, this man makes a statement that would be perfectly acceptable as a scientific explanation of our beingness, of the universe and where it came from. Now you have to be careful. And I think this is important. We have to be careful looking at esoteric meanings of ancient writings. That's why we have to really scrutinize it and look at it. I remember one time I was in a Kiwanis club in Santa Barbara, and we had a speaker, I can't remember who, but he was a very prominent individual from the community. And at the end of the meeting, one of our members, who was from an Orthodox church, stood up and said, "I hope you all have prepared. I hope you are right with God. Because we've been studying Revelation, and it says when the bear and the lion and the eagle come into conflict in the holy city, then the end of the world is here." And he said, Russia, the bear, and the United States, the eagle, and Israel, the lion, are in conflict in Jerusalem right now, and the end is here. Well, we ended the meeting real quick so we could all go back and prepare for the end. It didn't happen. You have to be careful when you look at these. And yet, let's look. We looked at this very scientifically. What he said fits. But how can we guide ourselves with it? Well, let me take another thing he said. Jesus said, when you are undivided, you will have the light inside you. And when you are divided, you will be dark. Because he wasn't really interested in the physical person